World War III might kick off in the one place no one is paying attention to, the Arctic region. Wow, I'm freezing my balls off. It's quietly become the location of great power competition between the United States, China, and Russia. This is because declining sea ice each year is opening up 2 new shorter shipping routes and revealing trillions of dollars worth of resources, from oil to rare earth metals necessary for high-tech weapons production. These new maritime trade routes will cut roughly 9,000 kilometers off a one-way trip between Europe and Asia instead of having to go through the Suez Canal. That's 40% shorter. Are we there yet? Yeah, Xi Jingping, we got there yesterday. On top of that, according to U.S. Geological Surveys, there are 90 billion barrels worth of untapped oil and 44 billion barrels of liquid natural gas in the Arctic. That accounts for 22%, a fourth of the total undiscovered fossil fuel resources in the entire world. Looks like Arctic region is just begging for a little bit of freedom. Russia has invested in reopening 50 old Soviet Cold War era bases along its 15,000 miles of Arctic coastline. And they created underground storage facilities here that could house cruise missiles in the region. This military buildup in the far north, where the land is mostly empty, might seem strange, but it makes more sense when you look at what Putin is actually trying to protect here. Because Russia has a lot more at stake in the Arctic than NATO might. Russia generates 20% of its annual GDP from its Arctic territory. Since 2017, China and Russia have been developing oil and natural gas exploitation in Siberia, opening a massive $27 billion liquefied natural gas refinery on the Yamal Peninsula. That's revenue that Russia depends on, and it's energy that China depends on for their strategic goals. The U.S. Department of Defense, for their part, have been accused of sleeping on this issue and been slow to react, since they haven't invested in Arctic warfare capabilities since the Soviet Union dissolved. Now, NATO's in a position where they're playing catch-up against Russia and China in the Arctic. This video is sponsored by Ridge Wallet. Ridge offers a wide variety of products, from pens to apparel, bags, watches, and their Ridge Wallet may just be the last wallet you'll ever need. It expands to hold up to 12 cards, plus room for cash, while remaining sleek and slim enough to slip into any pocket. This old leather wallet is gross. Get out of here. Designed with RFID blocking materials and optional AirTag integration, you'll be safe from digital pickpockets and you'll never have to worry about losing your wallet ever again. With over 30 colors and styles to choose from, the Ridge Wallet has already helped over 3 million customers upgrade from their old, bulky dad wallets to a product that fits in the palm of their hand. And speaking of dads, with Father's Day coming up, Ridge Wallet is making gift giving easy with one of the biggest sales of the year. So go find the best Father's Day gift for your dad or yourself by clicking the link in the description, or just head to ridge.com/taskandpurpose to save up to 40% through June 15th. Again, that's ridge.com/taskandpurpose for up to 40% off. The first move that the DoD made to remedy this mistake was to establish the Arctic Strategy and Global Resilience Office in 2022. Then, they based the U.S. Air Force most advanced aircraft wings in Alaska, which increased forces at Ellison Air Force Base by 50%. This means there are now 2 full squadrons of 54 F-35s and 48 F-22s, making Alaska the one place in the world now with over 100 fifth-generation stealth aircraft on location, making Santa Claus look like he's flying slow. But the tension keeps on tensioning up, because satellite imagery of the Arctic showed Russian forces also responded by constructing upgraded ravenous end-phased array radar stations. They did this in the Arctic in June of 2022. These are specifically designed radars to detect F-35 stealth jets as far away as Finland and Norway. These are the 2 new nations headed towards NATO membership. Ryan Tice, his paper at the Naval Postgraduate School, states, if steps are not taken to correct these vulnerabilities, the Bering Strait will almost certainly become a region like the South China Sea or the Baltic region, where competition, harassment, and intimidation threatens its status as a place of peaceful cooperation and exploration. Evidence of the Bering Strait's growing importance comes from Russia building the world's largest fleet of icebreaker ships to carry their massive tonnage through these new trade routes. This is because the Arctic Ocean is losing 13% of its ice per decade. This means that it's receding at a rate where it could be ice-free in the summer as soon as 2035. I said less ice in my Starbucks drink, not no ice. This thaw has already created new shipping lanes for most of the year. Russia and China are racing to capture control of this new Northern Sea Route, or Transpolar Sea Route. Every superpower is vying for military and commercial control over this newly accessible territory, and if we don't find a way to somehow cooperate, it could lead to World War III or worse, getting stationed in the North Pole for a year-long rotation. Why is this happening? Well, take a look at this chart for the amount of Russian cargo shipments through the Northern Sea in millions of tons. I might just be your average infantryman and not an average mathematician, but even I can tell that the trend is going up. And there's a lot of money for Russia and China to make here. The US president even issued an updated Arctic strategy in 2022 in response to all these changes. But all this military investment isn't just for some oil and gas and new shipping routes. That's not even the main resource. The US military is worried about when it comes to defending the Arctic. The real goal is protecting the valuable rare earth metals that are key to manufacturing the world's electronic vehicles, and that are needed for battery technology. They're all found here in large quantities in the north. It's estimated that in the Russian Arctic alone, there are $2 trillion worth of rare earth metals, the most important of which is called tiberium and dysprosium, both of which are located in the Arctic. After a couple of casual Google searches, I was able to find out that the United States military uses neodymium and tiberium,
neodymium, terbium,
in the production of radar and sonar systems, satellite communications and laser range-finding sites, components in the Javelin missile launcher, and the manufacturing of military fuel pumps. However, this is where China comes into the picture because they currently produce and process approximately 90% of the world's rare earth metals, and they don't want anybody coming in and stepping in on that monopoly. Since 2013, multiple Government Accountability Office and congressional research reports have warned about the United States' strategic vulnerability to not having an independent supply chain of rare earth metals that are vital for high-tech weapons production. The Arctic resource could reduce China's monopoly. China's 2018 Arctic Policy White Paper appears to just say the quiet parts out loud, and they recognized this when they went ahead and declared themselves as a quote-unquote near-Arctic state. Wait a second. How far exactly is China's northernmost point to the Arctic Circle? Oh, okay, only 3,000 kilometers away? That checks out in no way whatsoever. But yeah, China's a near-Arctic country. The 1959 Antarctica Treaty outlaws the use of Antarctica for military purposes, but leaves the door just a little bit cracked open for scientific research. One man's military facility is another man's science facility. Evidence that China is doing this comes straight from their own textbook, Science of Military Strategy, which is published by China's National Defense University. In it, they say, quote, military-civilian mixing is the main way for great powers to achieve a polar military presence. China should give full play to the role of military forces in supporting polar scientific research and other operations. According to the US Army's Foreign Military Studies Office, China's missiles wouldn't work properly without the Arctic. This is because missile guidance systems rely on the US-run GPS network for accuracy. To get around depending on the US, China set up a station in Norway's Polar Scientific Hub that is like China's version of the US Global Positioning System. This location is key to giving them global coverage of their navigation and missile strike systems in case America ever shuts off their access to the GPS network. China outlined an entire Polar Silk Road because they see how important this region will be in the coming years. From China's perspective, the use of Northern Sea Route would cut the distance from Shanghai to German ports by 4,600 kilometers compared to the route through the Suez Canal that they currently use. This is why China's shipbuilding infrastructure is creating a whole fleet of hardened hull cargo ships and ice-capable liquid natural gas carriers. According to the US Arctic Strategy paper, over the last decade, the PRC has doubled its investments with a focus on critical mineral extraction, expanded into scientific activities, and used these scientific engagements to conduct dual-use research with intelligence or military applications in the Arctic. So China just claimed, oh, don't look at me, I'm just doing my homework up in the Arctic. Meanwhile, it's military applications that they really have up there. One example is how China's Arctic Acoustic Research Program could be used to track ships and submarines in a way similar to how NATO's SOSUS network functioned back in the Cold War. Chinese statements and outward-facing documents all downplay any military interest in the Arctic, but leaked internal documents show the Chinese military's focus is on beefing up presence in the Arctic as well as using military force as a means to secure the region for China's interests. Even though the Arctic might be heating up in terms of tension and literally temperature, the location is still, relatively speaking, incredibly cold. More US soldiers need to learn what the militaries of India and Norway frequently already practice. What it takes to not only survive up to 60 degrees Fahrenheit below zero temperatures, but also how to operate in 4 to 5 feet of snow and endure winds up to 50 to 60 miles per hour. Your average infantryman will deal with frostbite in just a few minutes if their skin is left uncovered, while whiteout conditions quickly disorient troops even if they're experienced in Arctic warfare. The harsh freezing climate of the Arctic makes the simplest of activities, like heating up my Chili Mac MRE, nearly impossible, let alone actual military drills, which become far slower and significantly more complex to achieve in the Arctic. Soldiers need to learn to thrive alongside Father Winter, as they call it. I wouldn't sign up for that personally. Send me back to the 120-degree heat of the desert, thank you very much, and hua. For some context, because smooth brains like myself couldn't find the Arctic on a map if you held a goat gun to my head, the Arctic Circle makes up approximately 6% of the entire Earth's surface. Over 4 million people live in the area of 21 million square kilometers. A little more than half of those are Russian people. 40% of the area is made up of land that is split between a number of different countries. 8 states are considered Arctic nations: Russia, USA, Denmark, Canada, Sweden, Finland, Norway, and Iceland. Basically everything north of the 66-degree latitude in the Arctic Circle has historically been considered one of the final frontiers that has not been open to full-on exploitation of its resources by human beings, but you know us humans. If there's something of value somewhere, we're gonna find that. So even if somehow the temperature trends reverse and the new routes do not open up, the Arctic is still becoming geopolitically important again for the first time in decades. So, was Fallout 3 correct? Will World War III battles take place in the Arctic? It seems less ridiculous every day. It's easy to forget how America borders Russia and Alaska and is only a stone's throw away in this location. I can see Russia from my house. We don't often look at the map from the top down like this, but at our closest points we're only 50 miles away, separated between the United States and Russia by the Bering Strait. And we see already in 2021, Alaska's $3.2 billion mining industry grew 5% in just 1 year, as the Arctic becomes easier to extract resources from as it warms. For such an inhospitable place, the Arctic has a long history of military tensions than most people probably realize. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union's premier naval bases of the Northern Fleet were located at 2 different bases, both exited into the Bering Sea above the Arctic Circle, meaning that the area was a prime surveillance target for NATO, and a major naval choke point if World War III ever started. As a result, the Soviet Union invested heavily in nuclear submarines that could travel under Arctic ice sheets, along with massive nuclear-powered icebreakers that could clear routes for shipping and naval vessels. Since nuclear submarines aren't something NATO liked to lose track of, an entire net of sonar detectors called SOSUS was set along the seabed in a line known as the Guyuk Gap. This $16 billion sonar net connected the facilities on land via undersea cables and could track ships and submarines entering or exiting the Arctic Circle. But the Soviet Union countered by designing submarines that could punch up through Arctic ice and launch missiles without ever tipping the detectors off. Roughly half of the USSR's submarine fleet was attached to the Northern Fleet, meaning these were over 200 submarines NATO had to track in the region, in addition to surface ships, long-range bombers, and naval patrol aircraft. As naval, missile, and sensor technology improved, both NATO and the Soviet researchers worked on ways to operate further and further north. even into regions that were covered by ice year-round. A lot of people forget that during the height of the Cold War, U.S. Strategic Air Command flew 24/7 non-stop patrols of B-52 bombers armed with atomic bombs to guarantee a second strike capability, a mission that has since been retired. The Arctic has always been an avenue of approach to the American homeland. Soviet bombers and missiles would be able to fly over the Arctic region in order to strike at American targets. This is why the United States and Canada first established the North American Aerospace Defense Command 64 years ago in 1958, building radars and bases throughout the far north to defend against this kind of contingency. Even if we fast forward to today, much of the US missile defense infrastructure is located there, but barely anyone pays attention to it. There are currently two major shipping lanes through the Arctic making use of retreating sea ice: the Northern Sea Route that passes along Russia's north coast, and the Northwest Passage that passes through the United States and Canadian waters. Both of these routes are roughly 40% faster than traditional routes like going through the Suez Canal, shaving off 10 to 13 days from trips and saving literal boatloads of money in fuel and transit costs. These routes are currently only open during the summer months, requiring specialized icebreaker ships to clear the way. Shipping lanes aren't just lines on a map, and new resources aren't just new opportunities. They represent one of the most direct ways that countries and alliances have competed against each other throughout history, sometimes spilling over into outright war when they're valuable enough. The US Army in some ways is a big bureaucracy, and it takes a long time to reorient itself towards a new threat. In 2022, they showed their commitment to this northern fight by reactivating the 11th Airborne Division, the Arctic Angels, to reinforce Alaska as a key defense node in America's north-facing front. The infantry units there will replace their wheeled Stryker infantry fighting vehicles with brand new tracked Beowulf cold weather all-terrain vehicles that are purpose-built for snowy, freezing terrain. This is already in use in militaries like Norway and Finland. The 10th Mountain Division at Fort Drum is getting over $12 million worth of cold weather training gear, while Fort Drum itself has been designated an Arctic zone for specialized extreme winter training courses. All of this poses enough of a threat to make Canada's military invest $4.9 billion into a joint US-Canadian layered defense North Shield specifically to guard against infiltration or surprise attacks from across the Arctic Circle. Canada prides itself on keeping a close eye on affairs on its northern island chain, with their Navy's Vice Admiral saying there's only about 150 ships that actually transit the North every year. We know every one of them, and we track them very well. Iris Ferguson is United States Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Arctic Strategy. She said, "The warming trend is allowing our adversaries to have greater presence and access to the region. There's a sense that we in the Pentagon also need to be thinking more proactively about what we need to operate in the theater, how we work closely with our allies and partners." In 2019, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, declared Russia's attempts to control new Arctic shipping lanes illegal, and that attitude has guided US and NATO policy in the region ever since. With Finland and Sweden joining NATO, 7 of the 8 Arctic nations will be part of the alliance, and whether or not the Arctic continues to heat up in temperature or not, it's not going to change the fact that there will be increased competition in this region due to Russia feeling like they need to protect against Finland and Sweden in an area where they earn 20% of their GDP. Even with the whole world watching, the resources and trade routes opened up by a changing climate might prove too tempting for Russia and China to ignore, and the near future looks anything but predictable for the North Pole. If you liked this video, I think you'll really enjoy this one about why the $800 billion US defense budget might not be as big as it sounds. If you like the Golden Girls t-shirt that I'm wearing right now, we designed this for you guys, the first 1 million subscribers in the Spare Parts Army. You can get it from the store below or the link in the description. I'm your average infantryman, Cappy.